Hey guys, Chris here from Work to Game, Gaming Kinda, and now Gaming Kinda TV over on Facebook as well. That means that if you are watching this, it is October 13th or later, so I can finally share everything we learned from the media tour, but I do have a couple of disclaimers. First of all, Yoshi P opened his statement to us by saying a thank you to the medical staff over the last few years, and I would like to echo his thoughts. You've been asked of a lot in the fight over the last few years, and if 14 can help be a way to connect with friends or relax after a long day, then I am happy that I can share what we now know about Endwalker coming up very soon, and the devs hope that in some small way that can be a thank you and a place for you to enjoy and appreciate all that you do. Second, a disclaimer about the content itself. We were given brief access to a development build of Endwalker. Any footage I used from this time is development footage and will be labeled as such. Any of this is subject to change, any tooltips, any potencies, anything I show as they put the finishing touches on Endwalker may be subject to adjustments. So as part of talking about physical ranged, one of the first things I'd like to stop and take care of is the role actions. These are the things that they all share, and then just is there anything that's going to generally affect them on an individual job basis, but that really kind of unifies them. So as we go through the role actions, leg graze, slowing targets down their movement speed by applying heavy, second wind, instantly allowing yourself to heal yourself, foot graze, binding the target, Peloton, allowing movement outside of battle. The interruption of a target's action with head graze and arm's length, nullifying knockback and draw-in effects, as well as applying a slow when struck, which reduces the swing speed of enemies. All 6 are identical. This is not true of every single role, but all 6 are identical. Paired with this, because this is physical ranged, I would like to make a note that the physical parity and the magical, that they're back and forth. When they moved over from 1.0 into a Realm Reborn, those were calculated a little bit differently. Imagine them each having a coefficient that they were both multiplied by. And so you have your potency on the tooltip, this imaginary multiplier, your attributes, which we know got stat squished, and that determines the final outgoing damage, which of course is affected by any mitigation on the thing receiving the damage, and that's the amount of damage done. Those coefficients were different for magical and physical, so they did bring physical up to be in line with magical, so that means that if you don't want the number at the end of the equation to go up just across the board universally, by basically nullifying those coefficients so that they're identical now, the potencies on the physical abilities do have to be reduced. And so if you are somebody that shares their time across maybe a caster and a phys ranged, just note that some of the potency reductions that you see within physical could be just that excess potency being pulled out of the system. We don't know exactly how that's applied. Is it applied universally across all of the abilities within a job, or do they say, here's the total amount of potency per second that a job is doing, let's kind of pull it out in the areas that we think it is best pulled out. We don't know how it got there, but we do know that physical jobs were going to need to receive some sort of potency nerf that isn't going to change the outgoing amount of damage you have. That's to keep you from accidentally receiving some crazy level buff. And so that's the big universal physical ranged changes. Your physical counterparts, melee and tanks, they get to now do ranged attacks without breaking melee combos, but there isn't really anything universal like that here. As a matter of fact, this was the role that described in the live letter was seen as, they use the word orthodox with the changes. So it is something where all 3 of these jobs should feel relatively in line with how they did in Shadowbringers. Bard being the one that I think people wanted the most from, and the one that the live letter went the least over, and also the one that they noted would have the most still to go, and they were showing media tour build footage, so it is possible that some of the adjustments, if I had to guess, to things like Bard might not be done, but this should be a pretty good initial showing with what they showed us at the media tour. So just keep in mind, this is all here to flex. It should feel like an extension of, these should feel like quality of life adjustments to phys ranged, and this is just kind of the universal truths that are going to group regardless of which physical range job you're in particular honing in on. If you have the equipment for the role and you're spending your time jumping across all 3, you need to know this basic almost lack of information to have some context for where your job might go from here, since at a role level, there isn't a big personality shift like there is with healers being split in two, or with some of the universal changes that are being applied to tanks and to melee. This is really a role where there wasn't that big overhaul, and it didn't have something like Summoner just totally messing with the caster category. This category, when we talk about role actions being so orthodox and so plain, that's actually a pretty good summary for the just generic general improvement. I think all three of these jobs got better. And when we talk about the physical ranged versus Shadowbringers, but I am just rambling about the fact that they didn't change. So with Bard, I will note that this job is one of the ones that already wasn't perfect. Not everybody's been identically happy with every version of Bard that we've had over the years. And my knowledge of it is not perfect. So I will focus on what changed. I will focus on what got lowered as a potency, because within physical we expect that. We're going to start with what didn't change. Then we're going to move into what did change as far as buffs or something that changed in the way it functions. And then we're going to move into what is new. So I will report on this the way I do a live letter, where I am sharing the news with you. And then if you have direct resources for Bard, I encourage you to go dive as far into that job as possible. So with what did not change, repelling shot as a jump away did not change. I think mobility, if anything, has been something that's been added to across a number of jobs this time around. So I don't really see them needing to have a disengage be affected in any way. Warden's Pay on Troubadour and Nature's Min stayed the same. Mitigation is something that's hard to gauge without access to level 90 content. So we really don't know, do we feel like we need more of it? Do we feel like we have the right amount of it? It's really hard to tell with how little time and the type of content that we had access to at the Media Tour. Shadowbite is AoE Sidewinder, and while it did not change its single target, will be in the got weaker section here. So that is kind of note that it got separated, as opposed to a lot of jobs when one falls, so does the other. Moving on to what did get weaker. Keep in mind that physical potencies, I've said this a few times now, were reduced due to a back-end change to be brought in line with magical. So some or all of a reduction might actually just be absorbed by that. And so what I would like to note here is a couple of the percentage drops, because it's interesting to see what abilities dropped more than others, knowing that all of these numbers could flex not at all or a little bit by the time we get to the go live day. Straight shot went down by 20 to a new potency of 180, making this in that 10 to 15% range. So that's something we're going to see a lot of. Its upgraded version, Refulgent Arrow, also dropped, going from 340 to 280, but I would say that straight shot can be triggered by a lot more things now. So we're going to see a lot more of it in your rotation. So I would expect a drop, even if there was not the physical parity thing. Venomous Bite dropped in half to 15 for its dot damage. We're seeing dots across most of the game get a reduction at like a first glance. It feels like a lot of dots got hit. But its base damage stayed the same. Wind Bite is the exact same percentage drop, getting cut in half from 40 to 20. And we'll talk about how this got better when we upgrade these abilities a little bit further on. Bloodletter dropped by 20% from 120 to 150, and the AoE version, Reign of Death, dropped a similar amount by going from 130 to 100. Imperial Arrow dropped from 230 to 200, keeping us in that 10 to 15% range. So it might be a small indicator of how the physical potency is affecting this particular job that we're already starting to see a pattern, but it'll be hard to tell because they're having to also balance the fact that we've got some new stuff coming in. The Sidewinder stayed the exact same with following this exact trend where the dot dropped from 350 to 300 for both, and this is odd only because the AoE version did not change. So when we talk about that's just things that got weaker, what are things that just changed? They just feel different. Heavy Shot is dropping from 180 to 150, but remember with physical taking a hit, we'll just keep saying that. The buff allows you to hit straight shot now lasts 30 seconds. In general, it feels like things are allowing you to extend combos longer so that you can adjust to mechanics a little cleaner without having to worry about something fell off. So instead of 10 seconds, it jumping to 30 might not make a big difference, except when it does. Its upgraded version, Burst Shot, followed this pattern, so it has a potency drop from 250 to 220, but I did want to note that because when it makes you ready for that straight shot, you now have a longer window there, and that's kind of different. In line with this, Barrage did not change, except that it now has that straight shot ready to 30 seconds instead of 10. Iron Jaws actually added a 35% chance to make you straight shot ready. We're going to see a lot of that. Caustic Bite, like other dots, kept the same base damage, dropped the dot potency, but this time we add yet another 35% chance at triggering that straight shot. This is an upgrade from Venomous Bite, so like you're probably seeing a little bit of a theme here so far. Storm's Bite is going to follow this trend by upgrading Caustic Bite, but losing half of its Shadowbringer's potency in trade for adding another 35% chance to trigger straight shot ready. Raging Strikes dropped from 80 seconds to be in line with that 60 seconds. They said a number of abilities would be dropping to be more in line with these standard burst windows so that you felt a similar cadence as you jump job to job. It will not be true of all buffs, but they did warn us many cooldowns would do this. Quick Knock dropped by a third. Okay, so we went from 150 all the way down to 100, but we gained a 30% chance to reset our instant, single, and AoE abilities. This is swapped out. We're going to upgrade this at level 82, so we'll see Quick Knock fall off the bar. Mage's Ballad, the duration went up from 30 seconds to 45 seconds. The chance to reset instant dot ticks doubled from 20% to 40%, and it's now going to grant Mage's Coda, which for now, just store that in your mind as that's going to be a sticker on the right side of your gauge. Wanderer's Minuet, duration, 45 seconds. Proc chance, to build stacks for use with Pitch Perfect. Went from 20 to 40%. Now we've got a second sticker, this one being called Wanderer's Coda. While Wanderer's Minuet is up, you can cast Pitch Perfect. The base potency stayed the same, but the second and third stack got smaller, so the max potency on these went from 450 down to 360. Armor's Paeon also went up to 45 seconds, proc rate 20 to 40, giving us our final sticker called Army's Coda. You'll hold on to all three of these stickers for just a little bit until we get into the What's New section. During any of these three songs, you can buff direct hit from what was just 15 seconds up to 20 seconds. So that's a better amount of buff going out. Apex Arrow got a potency reduction from 120 to 100, but it was up to a max of 600, now only being to a max of 500. So if executed at 80 or higher on the gauge, this will take you into a new ability, Blast Arrow. So we're going to see some of this potency come back in the brief but final section, What is New. Obviously, first let's talk about Blast Arrow, because that's where we left off. This is a big new line AoE. It's going to hit for high-end, a ton of high-end damage. And so that Apex Arrow, you're going to want to max that out, because that's where this Blast Arrow comes in. Landon's Bite will be the Quick Knock upgrade that I mentioned earlier, and this will add just another chance to reset instants. There's a ton of instant kind of procs, so it should feel more along the cadence of something like Dancer, where there's a lot of procs going on. You're resetting your straight arrow all the time, so we've just got things resetting everywhere. So all the potency gain in this job is that we're going to be seeing some of these abilities that were up every once in a while being up a lot more often. As our last stop, let's talk about these stickers, okay? These are the songs. We now are going to basically get a straight up boost at max, assuming you have all three stickers. This is going to be 5% damage dealt by everybody within 20 yards, so it's basically an Astro Divination, kind of. So this is a massive raid buff, and I think this right here is what allows Bard to be a relevant slot in a raid group. It's competing with some really, really strong choices. Dancer, of course, always being a strong choice for your Fizz ranged. Machinist, the robot's just cool. And so, like, it's been hard for some bards to feel that sense of class identity. Hopefully this kind of takes them back to feeling like their songs are working towards these big buffs. I don't really know if people want it being a bow mage or if they want it being this like archer. It hasn't quite made up its mind. Hopefully this is something that can get people a little more excited about it. I will say it's hard because the changes here are not as flashy as a robot doing something cooler, The Dancer changes really aren't flashy, so within the Fizz ranged, Dancer just feels better. It doesn't feel flashy about it. So maybe Bard comes out okay here. I think where it's going to struggle is when you have ranged players that don't want to be Fizz range. They want to go over to the red mage changes, the black mage changes, the summoner changes. There's a lot to be excited about there. And if they're into kind of being on the non-magical side of things, there's a lot to be excited about within Melee. And so I think Fizz ranged as a role did stay relatively orthodox. And Bard feels really in line with that. I think the live letter, it felt like, okay, here's what Machinist is getting, here's what Dancer is getting. And whether or not you're excited about those things, there was this Bard that literally had a picture like, huh? Oh, was that today? I wasn't ready. And it felt like they were like, yeah, and Bard might have some songs or something, and let's talk about Machinist. And that was like all we got. And so I was really hoping to dig in here and be like, wow, they must have just been really pinched for time during that live letter that they didn't spend more time going over the changes here. But I think the changes here are something that, without spending more time with it, are actually kind of hard to pin down from my perspective. It feels like there's some extra proc chances and stuff, so it does feel like there's going to be something that you notice, but can't quite put your finger on. It's a lot of these straight shot and like triggering the instance and things like that. It's nice. I'm having trouble gauging what it's wanting to be. Now, all of that to say, like, I am in the middle of finishing leveling my Fizz ranged right now, and my Bard is going to be my last one, and I have enjoyed it from day one. I enjoyed Archer. As a matter of fact, it feels so hypermobile that I feel like I should be moving. So maybe by having all these procs up, it makes it feel like, well, I'm too busy weaving things, so I don't actually have the ability to move as much, and so maybe it does feel like, wow, I'm just too in the zone, being this like Legolas or something. Maybe it feels like I'm really letting things run loose. You know, I spent some time with each and every job on a dummy, but that is not the same as an encounter. That's one of my complaints about Stone Sky Sea Air, and so I'm hoping that Bard is just something that when I get it to cap, when I have it at 90, and I'm taking it into encounters, I'm like, oh my god, you know, maybe there are theory crafters that don't include this in their ideal group comps. Every job in 14 is valid if you and your friends all have a comp and you want, you know, and this is the Fizz range you want to play. Every job can clear every piece of content. We're never that out of balance. But if this is one of the ones that's deemed a little bit less optimal than the other ones, ideally that there's something here where it's like, yeah, I don't care about that. It's just fun. Like, it's just fun. And that's something that's really hard to put a finger on when we really only get to test it against dummies, in synced content, a little bit of world content. We're in a single day media tour where we're trying to touch a lot more than just one job. And especially when there's two new jobs that we've got to spend a ton of time reading. So I'm hoping that Bard is just something that is really fun. And I'm sorry that I don't have anything here to kind of reveal like a big shift or big change, a big adjustment that says, Bards, I know that the job action trailer kind of left you and Scholar out, but I have huge news. I don't have huge news. So maybe there's something in here I'm reading and you're like, wow, that would change my life. But I just glance over it. I'm glancing at the same percentage drops, the same adjustment patterns that I'm seeing job after job after job. I'm not seeing anything here that's just outstanding other than we now have to manage getting these 3 separate stickers to go into a divination, and like that's kind of something that Astra was getting rid of. So, you know, maybe one man's trash is another man's treasure, but it feels a lot like Astra was like, hey, we really need to address divination. I don't want this anymore. And Bard's like, oh, I'll take that. And so I don't know. I love how mobile physical range jobs are. So maybe the proof is in the pudding. Maybe it's just not. Maybe Fizz ranged is not something that you get from reading. The mobility, the instantness of it, the just constant outgoing something, these proc rates going off. Maybe that's where it's at. As a non-Fizz ranged player, maybe that's what I'm missing, is that it's not about the tooltips. It's not about the objective measure. It's about what does it feel like. And that's something that we're just not going to know until November. I wouldn't worry about the specific potency numbers in particular. I would be interested in seeing, do they address any of the proc chance rates? And do they address any of like the percentage buff rates to make raid groups a little more like, what do you mean you're not going to bring your bard? So there's a little more of a fight over which Fizz range gets the slot. We'll have to see. I don't play in any groups that are so competitive where, you know, we just bring who wants to come. And I think, honestly, most of the game runs that way. So even the world first groups, a lot of times you hear that they just play what they want to play and that they don't follow the meta. And honestly, a lot of times the meta's underinformed, especially for those early tiers. And so even if they themselves help set the meta, they're like, well, and then we tried some stuff and this ended up working out. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm interested to see what this means. Best of luck, Bard.